Hey, what's up, guys? We are going to be taking a look at the top 10 rogue decks for this format. Now, this is going to be a list of the most winning, so tournament winning, tournament topping decks that aren't Maliss Ryzeal variants or the Blue Eyes deck that just came out for 3 structure decks makes a tier 1 deck. So this is going to be the perfect list for you to find out what other decks are competitively viable that just aren't the tier 1 decks. Let's get right into it. All right, so at number 10, we are going to have Dinomorphia. Now, this was actually one of my better budget decks last format, and I would say that this is going to be still one of the best options for Rogue because it is a great trap deck. It's better than Labyrinth right now, which is crazy to me. Seeing that the deck has now topped several regionals and even YCSs where Labyrinth has not. And this deck is so powerful because it makes basically the Dinomorphia Rexstrom, which is their premier boss monster, that basically becomes a walking, talking floodgate. That means your opponent cannot activate monster effects as long as this monster is on the field. Now, it can get easily outed to things like Droplet and even things like Branded, a Titaniclad. But the thing is that it's still one of those decks that the main decks like Maliss and Ryzeal, they don't have great answers to deal with Rexstrom. So at the end of the day, when you're running a deck that gets to main Solemn Judgment, Strike, and even broken cards like Iron Thunder, you are going to have a deck that if you lose die roll, you are very likely losing that game, and that just always can throw off a tournament run. And I think at the end, when this deck is actually having those really powerful game ones and then or going first strategy, and it's going second isn't even that bad either into certain boards. So, you know, I think you have a very unique trap fusion strategy in Dinomorphia that you could use to do very well with your decks. This list in particular was from the top 4 core TCG remote regional that recently happened. All right, next we're going to look at Dogmatica Stun, which is also a deck that was there in previous formats, but I think Runic Stun has kind of been the format definer stun deck for the last year or so. But this time we are seeing Dogmatica Stun come back into rotation, which is basically the stun variant for Master Duel. It hides behind things like Moon Mirror Shield and a Fossil Dyna in order to make your opponent not play the game, and you get to use Gangalda, which allows you to basically protect your board while setting up things like Titaniclad and Mirror Jade. Now, this is from a top 16 Latin American remote YCS, so this happened quite recently and at a great event, so I think that this deck's performance shines through even the Maliss and Ryzeal meta when we have, you know, a main deck lineup of basically 3 barrier statue, which is crazy. I'm not sure why the water one is in this one, because with decks like Mermail, I feel like running a different barrier statue might just be better. But this worked out for him, so what do I know? And you get to run powerful bangers like Nadir Servant, which can theoretically maybe get you to Titaniclad. And if you run the one of Albaz, you can even make a Mirror Jade. Next, we have Bestial Centurion. This is the deck that Pack went 11-0 over at YCS Niagara with, that got everyone on the hype train. Now, since then, the deck has kind of fallen off with the release of Ryzeal Detonator, which kind of poses a huge problem for the Centurion deck when it's going second into one. So this pilot did get some pretty good results though, getting top 8 at the Christchurch WCQ regional with Oliver, and he topped with a classic Centurion list. He's running few hand traps, bunch of Bestials too, which are great into the Ryzeal, all the Ryzeal variants. It's also okay into Maliss. I know a lot of people don't see the Bestials being good into Maliss, but if you know how to use them, if you hit, you know, something that's already used its effect, I can see how running this huge Bestial lineup in this deck helps you, especially when you can, this makes Chaos Angel, Light and Dark Chaos Angel very easily, which is a very good out for Ryzeal decks right now, because they don't have very many outs to out a Light and Darkness Chaos Angel. And you know, this deck is still making its best, you know, turn 1 end boards. It's not like it got nerfed or anything since Niagara. It's still making double Quasar, you know, with your Cosmic Blazar rather, which is just really broken. And obviously with the new support of Primus in the last 2 sets, I do think that the deck is still primed to be a great one-card starter deck that can play through a couple hand traps, but still does struggle to an Imperm or Ash on Primera. So, you know, it's one of those decks that will give you a great going first, and it's kind of like a budget White Forest. Next, we have Orcust, and this is super cool to see because Orcust, this is before the new support and Alliance Insight. So if this deck is alright performing across, I believe, 2 regionals now by the same pilot, this deck will definitely take the TCG by storm with the new support. However, we have this top 8 Little Rock WCQ regional top from Creighton Pre, who is if you might remember the name because he's also a branded player who gets tons of tops with that deck over with regionals. So shout out to Creighton. He got recently 2 tops with his Azamina Orcust deck, I believe, and this is a very cool version. It's basically the Orcust deck, but you're running the Azamina package with just Diabellstar Wanted and the Deception. It's kind of like my Azamina branded deck, essentially. He's just using it as a package to break boards and provide an Omni Negate, which is what I've been trying to tell people. Like, the Wanted package is just straight up a good engine with these types of cards. And Horus being a deck that loves Horus engine, or sorry, with Orcust being a deck that already loved the Horus engine, this is just like a better version for the deck. It's more updated, gives you draw power behind the Seeker, also baits hand traps, and on top of that gives you the oh so important Omni Negate in the form of Azamina Sylvia on top of the Soul Arichion, which is a board breaking capacity kind of card. I think the Moo is a little useless, but that's besides the point. This is a very good deck because you could still be doing things like looping Dingirsu and then also providing Galatea boards with the oh so powerful Orcust Crescendo. Very powerful option. I'd recommend watching the deck profile if you want to get more information on how to play this deck, but at the end of the day, this is just still Orcust. Next, we have Mimighoul. Mimighoul is a deck that keeps performing despite the Dominus impulses in Murmal and Maliss players decks, but this deck still is able to perform at regionals. We have another top 8 from the Christchurch regional, and it was Mimighoul. This deck can main Dimensional Shifter, which is still one of the most broken hand traps in the whole game. It stops, you know, full stop certain decks like like Feedsmith Ryzeal, and then also is great against things like Murmal going into this new format. Also incredible against Blue Eyes. So I can definitely see why they mained it. On top of having 3 Bestials, which is great because you're able to, you know, interrupt the Blue Eyes players, get the Maiden out of the graveyard, and then also being able to go toe-to-toe for the other decks, kind of like Mitsurugi or Fiendsmith. So, and this deck still has really powerful plays in the form of Mimighoul Maker and then Mimighoul Dragon. Remember, they just got broken rank 1s with Giant Mimighoul and Mimighoul Throne. So this deck is still a very viable deck. It does just get hard slammed to Dominus Impulse. We must admit that. But, you know, when not every, you know, when the best deck is still Ryzeal, arguably, you know, it's not going to have that big of an issue at, you know, a tournament. Next, we have Dogmatica Voiceless Voice, which this is a list that top 8'd the Fredericton WCQ regional. I also believe it just got a top at a YCS within the last 3 YCSs. So it's still a very viable deck in my opinion. I mean, it does kind of get hurt to Detonator, but when you're running gassy builds like this, where you have the Nadir Servant, you have the triple tactics plus hand traps, you are able to still contend with the likes of Maliss and Ryzeal and arguably Blue Eyes, because you can play their grind game pretty well with the Radiance and then also Blessing. This deck has a great grind game and is able to go toe-to-toe with even a deck like Blue Eyes in that respect. And you have powerful options like the Odd Eyes Pendulum Graph to stop decks even like Branded or something like that. It is very, or just any deck that's spell reliant. It's just very broken engine that has yet to be hit, and it still performs toe-to-toe. You know, check out my man Prophecy Wiz if you're looking for more Voiceless Voice tips. But also, I'd say, you know, this is one of those decks that you just have to know what you're doing to play against, and if you're playing it, I think you can definitely, you know, steal some wins just based on the fact that Voiceless Voice cards are kind of older, and then also they're just powerful. They're pound for pound low, you know, Diviner. These are very good cards. Saphira is just a crazy extender that any deck wishes it had for its own deck, essentially. The equivalent, right? So I think that this deck is very good and definitely an option for you to try if you're not really vibing with Mitsurugi and you still want to play a ritual deck, because it still has the tops to back it up. Speaking of Mitsurugi, we have the Mitsurugi Ogdotic deck. Now, Mitsurugi Ryzeal is one of my favorite decks, of course, but that's not a rogue deck. So this is more of the rogue version of it, where we are actually running the Ogdotic cards, like Neptibus, basically Karus, Nayuya, and of course Nunu. You know, this is a very broken engine because it makes Snake Rain one of the best one-card starters. If you draw Snake Rain, you basically win the game in this kind of build. And you're running bangers like the Mitsurugi Fusion or Ritual to get into your boss monster of Ame Murakamo, which is a hand rip for 2 basically, and then a board wipe. I say hand rip for 2 if you set up on your own turn, because you hand rip on your turn and then your opponent's turn. And it's consistently recursive, and that board wipe Raigeki factor gives you a really nice going second, and even going first as an interruption through hand traps. You also get an Omni negate with the Mitsurugi Purification, but this build is leaning towards more of a board breaker plus a banger kind of non-engine setup, where like if they see non-engine, they want it to perform. So 3 Fuwalos, 3 Ash, 3 Talents, and 3 Droplet at 45 card build with a deck that has a lot of gas, so it's able to push through boards pretty easily. I can see how this worked, and obviously this was from the O's Brunk WCQ regional, so congrats to this pilot. Very good performance, and he ended up making a very unique build that can go into rank 8s too, which is really cool because the Mitsurugis are level 8s. So it is one of those things I'd be on the lookout for if you are interested in something. It does get hard hit by Dweller, but you know, when you have things like the Droplet in the main deck and then Xyz Encore in the side and Droll, you are ready for that Dwellers. All right, we have my favorite deck, Branded Despia. So this got a recent top at the Christchurch Regional. Shout out to Keza. He messaged me the day before the event and basically was like, is your list from the other day good? And I was like, yes, sir. And he took it to the regional. He ended up cutting it down a few cards to 51 and replaced a couple things. He put like a Regained in, and then put in Stapelia and removed the Ido, but overall, and put an Xyz Encores, but overall it's the same idea. The 3 High Spirits, the 3 Nadir, the 3 Super Poly, the 3 Fuwalos in the main deck. Very important to run in this kind of build. So and plus the Proskinion. So he has all the theory. So it's very cool to see my kind of deck profile go and perform. So I had to cover this. And Branded, this topped literally a week into Blue Eyes format, guys. This is what I'm talking about. Branded, you know, just topped the Birmingham YCS, but now it's already topping a regional right afterwards. So I think Branded, not trying to, I think it's going to be one of the best meta calls for this format, because you can make Alba Lenitus the Abyss Dragon, which says basically you can contact fuse off any amount of dragons on the field plus an Albaz to make this thing. So you just contact fuse off the whole Blue Eyes board, you know, whatever it is, Quasar, Spirit Dragon, or their new negate, like you can, it doesn't matter, you just set Albaz and then you just completely go off on them. So it's very good in that respect. But of course, Branded post-gimmick Puppet Band and Branded Fusion to 1 has definitely hurt the deck, but it's still great. It makes some of the best turn 1 boards in the game. If you haven't known, the Light and Darkness Dragon Lord is a triple Omni negate, which this deck is making off of most of their 1-card combos. So I think Branded does a lot to provide in a deck that can go second extraordinarily easily with its in-engine board breaking capabilities with Albaz, Mirror Jade, and now you have the Chaos Star Source Dragon, which is an on-the-fly pop 2 that you can super poly off a Blue Eyes board to make. Like if you draw Super Poly against Blue Eyes, you win the game because you make Chaos Star Source and pop 2 of their back row, and it's GG. So, you know, and then Quertus is just a broken card right now, providing you easy OTK lines into the Malice board, which is your hardest matchup. So that's definitely what you have to be on the careful with. I think also this deck is currently doing a careful thing where it's not going to try to lose to Dweller with 60 card or anything like that. And I think the Fuwalos in the main is very smart, because the more cards Branded sees, the more it's just going to win if you draw an 8 to 9 card hand kind of thing. Branded's very dangerous, lots of gas, and it's great to see Branded performing, and we're going to keep covering it on the channel, guys, on top of all these other decks. All right, at number 2, we have Fiendsmith Yubel, because recently the GOAT Patrick Hoban topped with it, you know, old school GOAT. He recently took it to the Latin American YCS, and he said he only took it because he didn't know the other decks, and he just needed to play something he knew because he played this deck the format before. But I still think this shows that Yubel is still great. Like, this is a deck people have kind of opted to play other decks now, but the only hit on the ban list to it was one Phantom. Now, one Phantom does hurt it, I think, a fair bit, but it's still a deck that has its entire main deck intact and can main a ton of non-engine between the Ash, Veilers, Drolls, Imperms, and Mulcharmy, but also provide one of the best, if not the best, end board in the game behind the Desiree, Wave King Caesar, Verudoris, fan of Yubel, SP Little Knight, Unchained Soul. There's lots to want and actually be happy with this kind of deck. It does get really hit to the Mulcharmies, though. I think it's really bad into Fuwalos. I think it's arguably not that. I mean, I think Perulia is just fine against it, and then Meowls is also okay against it, but I think that Droll is also decent against it too, so I think that it just depends on... I think it's more resilient than the decks before it kind of thing into hand traps, but for the most part, it's still making one of the best turn 1 boards that's like basically comparable to any of the tier 1 decks, if not better. And it has a bag going second. That is the issue. However, you can do weird things like OTK shenanigans, and then also you do have the non-engine to help you get there. So overall, when you have a good pilot behind a deck like this, I think this is actually a deck that could very well do very well and keep topping YCSs or regionals. And last but not least, we have Crystron. Shout out to my man Yassine, who's been piloting this deck, and also Malad for getting top 8 at the regional here with it very recently, and this did get us top 64 at YCS Birmingham as well. So this deck is looking actually pretty good overall. I think it struggles really into Abyss Dweller and Lancia. Lancia does slam this deck, but with Blue Eyes becoming more pronounced in this format, so less people will be on Malice, I think overall, I think this deck is actually looking really good. Blue Eyes isn't making Dweller, so this deck is going to be able to tango and has a pretty good Blue Eyes matchup for that reason alone. And you can run things like the Kashtira cards and the Azamina cards like this pilot and many others have been doing in order to play around, you know, getting Lancia, getting Dweller, because these guys provide you a board state, you know, an end game that doesn't go through a wall with that is Lancia or Dweller. So I think that's why you see people like Stevie Blunder, who just got rank 1 on DB with this deck, running basically a very similar build. So makes a lot of sense to me. This build's even running the Sinful Spoil Subversion because it's searchable as a board breaker, which I like a lot. This build also runs some hand traps and board breakers, and it's a very powerful deck that gets a machine locked. So you basically only can run machines for the most part, but very powerful deck overall. And you can run techs like the Poseidra honestly in the side, which is pretty cool. And so yeah, I think overall this is probably the best rogue deck, just power ceiling wise. If you're looking for a rogue deck, I think Crystron is definitely it. So guys, what did you think about my list? Did I miss anything? What was your favorite deck on this list? Let me know down below. We'll be back next month with another top 10 rogue decks, so please give this video to 100 likes if you guys want to see that. Check out my budget top 10 lists for this format down below, and then also we have a branded deck profile from the other day. Go check that out if you guys are interested with anything. With that being said, we will be seeing you guys later. METAGAMESGX signing out. Have a great day. Thank you.